So as I said, this is the final session. Kathy and I are going to talk to you a little bit about the importance of charitable giving and how that might be an option for you in your estate plans. And so we've called it Your Legacy, Your Way, because at the end of the day, this really is all about how you can structure your own philanthropy. We've titled this Your Legacy, Your Way because it's really all about how you structure your own giving. But let's start with a trip down memory lane. I can't see any of you, but how many of you remember the Ice Bucket Challenge from 2014? Kathy, did you actually participate?
I did not, but I watched very famous people get very wet.
I actually participated in this. I was both the receiver and the bucket dumper for my friend James. We were actually in Europe that year, and so we did it. But for those of you that remember the Ice Bucket Challenge, it was a viral sensation in the summer of 2014 to help raise awareness for ALS. And if you may or may not recall that it raised over $220 million around the world for ALS. And it was a great way to showcase how people could come together and do something that's good for the community and still have fun while doing it. Today's topic is a little bit different, and it's not necessarily about campaigns, but it's about creating something that is going to be part of your legacy. And so we want to talk a little bit about that. So let's talk a little bit about what philanthropy means. And I was just talking to Kathy before we started. I actually don't like this word because it has some negative connotations and some stereotypes around it. When you think of the word philanthropist, you tend to think of a Rockefeller or someone who's very, very wealthy, and you might not consider yourself a philanthropist. But I would challenge you to think differently, because if you've bothered to check into today's session, charity is something that's already important to you. So what is philanthropy? It's goodwill to fellow members of the human race. It's an active effort to promote human welfare. So does that sound like a rich person? Does that sound like someone that's not like you? We're all philanthropists. Anyone who is on this call who wants to make a difference in their community, who cares about their community, is already a philanthropist. And so that's why I say I'm not a fan of the word, because I don't want it to automatically conjure up negative stereotypes for you. I want you to think of this as doing good for our community, and we're each able to do that in a different way. In fact, at the Edmonton Community Foundation, we have a program that we offer for some of our charity partners. And there was a research study that looked at the different kinds of philanthropy or philanthropists. And they broke philanthropy down into sort of 7 different kinds of people. And so there's the socialite, and they like to give back to their community because doing good is fun. So these are the people that love to go to galas and support events, because events are fun and it's a great way to give back to the community. And so maybe the Ice Bucket Challenge would appeal to the socialite because it was fun and novel at the time. But there are also people that give because doing good is a moral obligation. So these are the devout. These are people that do it from a place of faith or a place of morality or ethics, and they feel that it's something that they ought to do. And so that's a different kind of, a different place of giving. And then there's the altruist, because giving back and doing good just feels right. And we hear, Kathy and I hear from our donors all the time that that it feels good to give back, and they feel like they've been able to do something that's greater than themselves, and that's something really important to think about when you're giving back. There's also giving back in return. So this may be to a cause that helped out the donor or helped a family member. Maybe it's a hospital or a health-based charity that helped a family through a particularly difficult time. Maybe it's a social service organization that helped a person or their family with a leg up in a particularly difficult time of their lives. So paying back a good deed or paying it forward is what makes the repayer tick. For some, doing good and giving back is good business. And in a few minutes, Kathy's going to talk a little bit about how giving back has some financial benefits and some tax advantages. So for the investor, they see that giving back to the community and doing good is also maybe a good financial decision too. And then there's the communitarian. See, Kathy, I can never pronounce that one quickly. It just makes sense. It's just what we do. We are part of a community. We are part of something greater than ourselves. And so the communitarian just wants to give back to make the community a better place for themselves and a better place for others. And then there's the dynast, which is not necessarily connected to dynasty, although it could be. A dynast is a person that comes at philanthropy and comes at community sport from a place of family tradition. And I'm not saying that I come from a dynasty, but I certainly come to philanthropy and giving back from my parents. They were a great influence on me, and my father was very philanthropic in his own way and volunteered a lot of his time in our community, and I learned from him and I watched him. And so doing good is a family tradition without it being a matter of financial tradition. So those are the 7 faces. And Kathy and I can't see you, but I would challenge you now to think about these 7 and which one are you? Maybe you're more than one. And maybe this changes as your life changes as well. Life situations are going to come and go, and our passions and our interests are going to come and go. And so what you consider yourself to be today might not be what you are a year from now or 5 years from now. But at the end of the day, giving back is what philanthropy is. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So back in 2014, there was a study of having conversations between clients and their estate planners. And of course, this is all about Wills Week. We're talking about wills and estate plans. And so interestingly, 91% of advisors in that study reported that they did have conversations with their clients about charitable giving when they were talking about estate planning. The interesting thing is that in that same study, 13% of the clients said that they had conversations. Now, this is not to suggest whatsoever that one group is not being honest. There's probably 2 cases here, and this is just our assumption, is that number one, there could probably be a very different idea about what a meaningful conversation is. It could be that advisors are asking the question as part of a greater list of questions and for those of you that have already started your estate plans or already have them in place, have met with a lawyer, you know that there are a lot of questions to ask. So this could be just one question in a series of questions for the lawyer. And for them, they've checked off that box and they've done what they think they need to do. But for a client, it may not have been a meaningful interaction where they actually had a discussion about the causes and the issues that were important to them. And so they might not have considered that very meaningful. The other assumption that we might make on this is that a lot of advisors are simply not, they don't simply have the resources to know about the charitable sector. They're not experts in the charitable sector. They're experts in wills and estates, which is why you've gone to see them. So while I ask you to take these numbers with a grain of salt, it does sort of lead us to think about how we might move the needle on this. And whether it's having more opportunities for advisors to learn about how to have these conversations with our donors, or whether it's donors learning to actually be a little bit more forthright and actually saying to their estate planners, you know, there have been things that have mattered to me in my lifetime, and I want to make sure that those things are taken into account when I'm making my estate plans. That's all very important as well. So I just leave you with that. So when we're talking about charity or giving back or philanthropy or any of the words that you want to use, it means a lot of different things for different people. And if we had an opportunity to now, if we were all together in a room, I'd ask for some of you to yell out some of your favorite causes or charities that you would think of off the top of your head. And if that's the case, what we probably hear is the same 5 to 10 charities coming up as top of mind, because they're either in the media or they're timely, and they'll be timely at different points of time. So something that is timely this year may not be as timely as it was a year ago or a year from now. But it also means that people have a different way of looking at what charity means. For some, they see it as being something that's over there, something that's not about themselves. So it's a different group of people that they want to help or provide support for, but maybe it's something that they don't see as being part of themselves. And that's okay, but I would challenge you to think of charity as something that involves all of us. It's not something that's over there. It's something that everyone is involved with. So how many of you would have thought of the arts as a charitable cause? Because they are. The ballet, the opera, the symphony, all of the theaters, which are actually reeling right now during the pandemic, those are all charitable causes in our community. And there are a lot of philanthropists and community supporters that see the arts as an important charitable component of their lives. What about the library or education? We think of scholarships, but the library and education and helping youth is another part that might not come to mind right away as charitable. Probably most of you would have thought of the SPCA if I had said, name your top charities. But animal welfare is so much more than just pet care. There's education and prevention learnings and resources, as well as the environment. Our river valley is a jewel for us here in Edmonton. And so helping to protect the environment and protecting wildlife, that's another charitable cause. And there are so many more. The more you start thinking about what matters in your life, the more you start to realize that those things that do matter are probably charitable in nature. And in fact, I had a donor tell me once that she wanted to leave her legacy to the things that mattered, the things that she lived for, not the things that she died from. Now, that was her way of looking at philanthropy. She was very involved in her community, did a lot of great community work, and that's how she wanted to be remembered, and that's what she wanted her philanthropy to go to. But there are people and there are families that are very thankful for healthcare and for hospice care and things like that. So every family and every individual is going to be in a different place. So I ask you to think about the causes and the situations that you find yourself in on a day-to-day basis. And is charity a little bit less restrictive than you might have thought it was, maybe even before we started this session? These are just some of the things that we look at the Community Foundation, and this is not an exhaustive list whatsoever, but when we're talking to donors, we'll try to encourage people to think beyond sort of the top 5, and we certainly don't ask them to name a charity. The name the charity game is just fraught with issues because organizations change, missions change, and our own passions and our own interests change. And so what might matter to you today might not matter to you a year from now, or you may find new passions. So here are some other ideas that you might think of, and some of them that you might not think of as charitable, but on this page, they all are. So something to think about there. So before we turn it over to Kathy to talk a little bit about the mechanics of giving, what we hope to leave you with is some thinking about what your legacy means. This is Wills Week, as I mentioned. So what would be your long-term legacy? How would you want people to remember you? Why is that important to you? And what would it mean for you to create support in our community? And how would you do that? These are all questions that you're thinking of and that you're hoping to think of or hoping to articulate in your estate plans, or else you wouldn't have logged in today. And then there's the matter of timing. What, how, and what, sorry, why, what, and how are not the only things that are important, but when. When is the right time for you and your family to give? And is it in your estate plans, or is it in during your lifetime? So with that, I think I'm going to, oh, sorry, my apologies, sorry. I've already spoken to this point, though, is that shift happens. We have to be very careful how we say that, Kathy. Shift happens, and again, life changes. I've mentioned this already. Your family life, family moments thing, marriages, deaths, those all put things into perspective. And so as shift happens, your philanthropy and your legacy will change as well. So over to you, Kathy.
Yes, I get the task of talking about taxes.
And why is that?
Why is that? For years, I practiced tax before I joined the charity sector. And tax is actually why I came to talk to donors. I thought that they would all love to talk about tax. And really what I've discovered over 20 some years is that people really want to talk about how they want to make a difference in terms of what that difference looks like, whether it's helping an organization that helps a grandchild, or whether it's going to the symphony or a theater. That's what people want to talk to us about. And those are the funnest conversations ever. But then we also like to talk about leveraging gifts. And leveraging is a really interesting thing, because isn't it a wonderful experience to get matched, or to find out that something costs less than you thought it would be? So with that, I just want to tell you, it's amazing how many people don't claim their donations on their tax returns. It's such a lost opportunity. Getting our governments to help you support your favorite causes is actually brilliant. And so before you glaze over or leave us, I promise the tax part of this presentation is really short, but it's also very sweet, because there's 86,000 registered charities in this country, and you can support any 1 or 10 or 100 of them as you wish. And those gifts will cost you really only half what you think they're going to cost once you factor in tax savings. And that's right, even a very large gift can cost half. It's like a big 50% off sale. And I'm not much of a shopper, but I love 50% off sales. And you might say, well, wait, where in my income tax return does it say that? Well, that's because it doesn't really appear blatantly on your tax return. There's a 29% credit that's federal. And in Alberta, we have an additional 21% credit. So add those two together, and it's 50% off. There's a but, however, so we'll need a new slide. Oh, and I should say, sometimes 54%, I'll come back to that. The big but is you have to give to what's called a qualified donee. And most often that's a registered charity. You can also give to your town, your municipality, your province, or your federal government, but we find that those three are not usually top of the list for philanthropists. So it's small print with actually really a big consequence. Now, for some people, the news gets better and better, because if you have income over $200,000 in a year, that tax credit might be as high as 54%. So why are we saying this during a week of Wills Week? Well, that credit applies both to gifts you make during your lifetime and to gifts made in documents like your will, or an RSP or RIF designation, or a TSFA designation, or even a gift that's made through life insurance. So sometimes the most convenient time to make a legacy gift is when you're confident you don't need the funds for other purposes. So that's why wills are important. Some other things that might happen during a lifetime might be downsizing, or as you come into retirement, or if you sell a business, especially when tax happens, because some of that tax can be resolved by gifts to charity, either during your lifetime or in a will. So I'm going to talk for a moment about RSPs, just by way of examples. If you've tuned in this week, you will have heard that unless you give your RSP or RIF to a spouse, and there's some other limited exceptions, when you withdraw money or on death, what that RSP or RIF is worth is 100% taxable. And I have sat with the executor that wrote the check to Revenue Canada or CRA for the tax on an RSP, and it's not a pretty thing. So let me just run through an example. Let's imagine that the only asset I own was my RSP, and it was worth, let's say, $200,000. I have 2 children, and I might think that my 2 kids are going to share that RSP. So in my mind, I might think, oh boy, those kids are each going to get $100,000. But I have to pay tax on that first, either in my last tax return or when I get rid of my RIF or RSP during my lifetime. And let's say it's at the top rate. So now there's really, in this example, you'll see there's only about $104,000 left once I pay that tax. So my loved ones are never going to share the $200,000. They're going to share what's left. And really, in this example, CRA is my favorite child because they're going to receive more than either of my 2 kids. So with that, I'd like to ask a question, because of course you want to provide for your family. I want to provide for my family. We all care deeply about our loved ones. The question I ask is, would a 10% of your estate gift to your favorite cause really make a hill of beans of difference to your family? So I'm now going to use the example of 3 children. Does it really matter if they receive 1/3 of your after-tax estate or 30%? That's only a difference of 3 1/3% each. If that 3 1/3% doesn't make a difference, you have 10% of your estate to, and this might sound flippant, but to play with, to bring joy, to do something that you would just really love to do. And because of that 50% tax credit, that gift might only cost your estate 5%. So now your family's sharing 95%, but a charity's receiving 10%. That math actually works. And it does even get better and better. There's a special tax incentive for gifts of publicly traded securities. This incentive applies to shares that trade on a stock exchange and mutual funds. It doesn't count if you hold them in your RSP or RIF. You have to hold them personally. But when you give those securities in kind to a charity, so rather than selling them or cashing them and giving the proceeds, you actually transfer the share or the mutual fund to the charity. You don't pay tax on the capital gain that has developed while you've owned that security. So not only do you not pay tax on the capital gain, you also get a donation receipt and the credit for the value of the security on the day the charity receives it. Now that all sounds a bit mumbo jumbo-ish, but I'd love to share an example with you. And I call it my crazy but true story. So I'll tell you the story first, and then we'll go through the example. We've received this gift a couple of times from different donors. My favorite story is the donor who phoned me and said, "I'd like to give you a share." And I thought, shares, obviously shares. No, this donor wanted to give us one share. And I thought, it's a lot of work for one share. But it turned out that this was a Berkshire Hathaway share. And I don't know if you're familiar with Berkshire Hathaway, but this share was worth a lot of money. And so it was a fabulously generous gift. And for this example, I'm taking off all the zeros to make it relevant to more of us. But let's say this share was worth this amount, $2,816. That's great, but if the donor sold that share, they have to pay tax. And this donor had held the share for a long time. And so the tax on the capital gain was going to be over $400. So really what this person had in their back pocket was $2,300.45 if they sold the share and enjoyed the money. But what happened? Well, they gave it to the charity, and the charity got the full value. So the charity gets a share that's valued at $2,816, and the charity doesn't pay tax on it. The donor saves $471 and gets a 50% donation tax credit. So at the end of the day, this gift cost the donor just over $900, or about a third of what the charity actually received. So both the charity and the donor had a really good day with this. Our friends in taxation, not so much. They didn't get as much as they would, but this isn't a scam or a scheme. This is the best provision that the Income Tax Act actually has to offer. So let's go to the next slide then, Noel. And I'm going very quickly because this is intended just to be information, not tax advice. But some of you might have an insurance policy. Maybe you bought it when your kids were little so that it was there in case something happened to your family, to you, to protect your family, sorry. And many insurance policies are both provide insurance and a savings plan. And at some point you might be looking at what you own and say, wow, I don't need that insurance policy anymore. My kids are grown. I've got other savings, and you might be tempted to let that insurance policy lapse. Well, I'd like to give you an idea of something great to do with that policy. You could give that insurance to a charity. And there's a couple of ways of doing it. And the way the tax works depends on which choice you make. So, for example, you could name the charity as the beneficiary of the insurance policy. You continue to own it. And then at the end of your lifetime, when the insurance gets paid, the charity issues a donation receipt for the value that they receive, those proceeds of insurance. And that can be a really large number. And then you can use the tax credit in your tax returns for your last year of your tax return and the prior year. You can use it in the estate. There's many places, and the insurance and the tax credit sometimes happen exactly when you need the tax relief. For instance, when those RSPs are deemed to be fully taxable. The other approach is to actually make the charity the owner of the policy. And then the charity issues you a receipt now for the value of the policy now. And then we'll also issue you donation receipts as you pay premiums. They can't issue receipts for the premiums you've already paid, but the charity can issue receipts for the other premiums that you pay after the charity becomes the owner. Now, what happens at the end of your lifetime? The charity is just receiving proceeds of insurance of a policy it owns. It doesn't issue another donation receipt. So it's worth talking to your advisors, your financial advisors, to say, which of these is better for me? Because it really depends on your situation. I can't tell you today, for instance, which would be better for you. It's a matter of kind of thinking through, when does the tax happen? When do I need the tax relief? So that is a very quick way through a couple of ideas. You can always give cash, of course, but sometimes it's just not the best option tax-wise if you could give shares or if you could do one of these other things. So I'll turn it back to you, Noel.
All right. Well, hopefully, I think you've made it very easy for a lot of our listeners and viewers to realize that they can make a difference in a way that they might not have thought possible in the beginning. So we're going to change veins a little bit. And now that some of our viewers are thinking about how they might make a gift, let's talk a little bit about conditions. Certainly at the Community Foundation, we've seen some situations where a gift left in a will creates more problems for the estate than it needs to. So I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes sharing with you some thoughts about how to make sure that your gift doesn't fail and that it actually honors what you wanted it to do. So I'm going to start with this one. You may have an idea of how you want your gift to work, and you're going to leave it to your favorite charity. But does the charity actually do the thing that you say you want it to do in your will? And unfortunately, we've seen too many examples where the gift has a restriction or a limitation on it, and the charity isn't able to do with the money what the donor wanted. And that doesn't make anyone feel good. The charity feels like it's not able to fulfill the donor's wishes. And at the end of the day, the donor's wishes are not being honored. So before you start putting conditions in your will, check with your charity of choice to find out if they actually do the thing you want to support. And if they do, is it a core program? Is it really something that is relevant to their mission, and something that's going to happen on a day-to-day basis. So I take us back to the ice bucket challenge. I mean, I don't think anyone would do this now in 2020, knowing that it was 6 years ago, but you wouldn't want to leave money to the ice bucket challenge, because that's not something that is long lasting. And by the time you pass away and your gift is realized, the ice bucket challenge may not be around. So when you're talking to your charity of choice, find out if the thing that you want to support is something that is core to their mission and vision. Is there anything that's going to be added on? So is there, maybe you're doing a gift during your lifetime and then there's an add-on gift in your estate plans. Again, you want to make sure that you have all of these answers before you start making your decisions. Is the either the organization or the program long-term? So is it going to outlive sort of the next year or 2 years? Is it something that will still be relevant? Because the last thing you want is for your legacy gift to become irrelevant at some point in the future. And then this happens far too often. And I'm going to use the food bank as an example. We're all familiar with the food bank, I'm sure. They do amazing work in our community. Did you know that the food bank is actually not called the food bank here in Edmonton? It's the Gleaners Association, the Edmonton Gleaners Association. So your lawyer should check with you on this, but you can help them by double checking that your charity of choice is listed in your plans with its correct legal charitable name. So word of warning, if you've got the food bank written into your estate plans, make sure you change that. It's not called the food bank. It's the Edmonton Gleaners Association. So that you can look that up online, or quite easily, just give your charity of choice a call and ask them some of these questions. Don't keep it a secret. It's not about a secret. This is a chance for you to stop and think about what your legacy really means. It's a chance for you to have conversations with your charity of choice to make sure that you have a really good understanding of what it is that they do. And it's probably not a bad idea to share your thoughts with your family as well. If you're going to be leaving a gift, let your family know why it's important to you and how you want this to work. Because it will be a lot easier for your family to understand your intentions if you've had a conversation with them in advance. It'll be too late later, so do it now. So in a minute, I'm going to turn it back over to Kathy to talk about the kind of philanthropy that we do at the Edmonton Community Foundation. But I put these two photos up because they represent two very different causes. And the timeline around these is very different. So our colleague, Craig at the ECF, likes to talk about polar bears. If you want to help polar bears, help them now, because they're not going to wait, right? When we're talking about climate change, there are some causes that are immediate, and there are some issues that are pressing. Certainly, we're living through a lot of unprecedented issues now with the pandemic. So there may be a time and place that is much more current and urgent and now than a cause like the arts that is ongoing and will be here for the long term. And so when you're thinking about your philanthropy, think about whether or not there's an immediacy to your philanthropy. And if there is, maybe it's best to do it now during your lifetime rather than leaving a gift in your will. Because at that point, that issue may be very different from what it is today. So that leads us to how we deal with philanthropy at the Edmonton Community Foundation, which is predominantly through endowments. And I'm going to have Kathy talk a little bit about what endowments are, what they aren't, and how they work. So back to you, Kathy.
Sure, thanks, Noel. This term endowment, you heard Noel talk about his reservations about the word philanthropy. I have to declare a bias about the word endowment. first of all, it's a difficult word too. It conjures up the very wealthiest people as well, when that isn't necessary. But it's also the word on which I've kind of hung my entire career. I love these things, but maybe I should simply call them forever funds. So let me describe what it is and why it's not just the super wealthy that this applies to. Really, an endowment is a gift that has a forever purpose. And what do we mean by that? Well, a gift comes in the door, and I'll get you to switch the slide, Noel. The gift comes in the door and it creates a fund. And then we invest that fund to grow over the very long term. We talk about another even more Latin term, in perpetuity, but really I tend to think in terms of 200 years, something that's going to outlast my lifetime, certainly, and many generations. So we're investing it, and then each year, a percentage of the fund is granted. And it's not a large percentage, but it's granted each and every year. So this creates this perpetual kind of revolving door where amounts go out each year, and then it repeats the next year and the next and the next. And maybe the best way to talk about this is to give another real life example. And this is an example we have at the Edmonton Community Foundation. It was a fund created back at the very end of 1992, early 1993, to benefit the Boyle McCauley Health Center in downtown Edmonton. And I use this example, and people have heard this example from me, because it only ever had one gift. It was a huge gift, but it only ever had one. There's not been another to kind of muddle up the math. And quite frankly, it was $100,000, and I can do the math on that. So it just makes it simpler. Each year we've granted somewhere between 3.5% and 4.5% of the fund, which doesn't sound like a lot. And in a given year, it's not a huge amount. But over time is when the magic is felt. And this fund has granted over $160,000 to Boyle McCauley. Remember, it's only ever had the one gift of $100,000. And the fund itself is now worth double what it originally was. And you might say, well, why? Why are you hoarding that money? No, we're not. It's important that the 4% or whatever that amount is on an ever increasing volume, just to keep pace with inflation and cost of living. So it's important that the fund grow too. So meanwhile, during the course of that time, Boyle McCauley's been able to depend on that grant each year. It doesn't fund all of their programs, it just funds a little bit, but it's something that they don't have to fundraise for every year. So it's the magic over time, I guess, is what I want to say. And these funds are designed to stand the test of time for generations and decades, for sure. And the beauty of it is we can create one of these fully operational once it gets to $10,000. And people don't even have to give $10,000 all at once. They can do that over years and years to build up a fund. Now, I've come to learn that there's a measure of immortality and personal significance that can be attached to these funds. They outlive bricks and mortar. And there's this ability to name the fund. They can be named for the donor, for a friend, a loved one. They can be named for the work that they are to do. But they create this connection to the people that make the support possible. They come in all shapes and sizes, and people set them up for all the purposes that Noel mentioned. You know, it might be for the arts, it might be to help with companion animals, it might be for the food bank. These are our very favorite conversations. And in fact, for donors that are doing this during their lifetime, many choose what we call a donor advised fund, which is a really flexible alternative to a private foundation. And private foundations are expensive to operate, but these funds can kind of mimic a private foundation without all of the um, administration and expense of those. So the donors then make different granting choices each year, and they also have this great aspect that if the donor cannot give us advice, we've been told and it's documented what the fund is to be used for. And other people can't replace that. So the donor's choices we can protect. They can't be amended by future generations. So contrary to popular misunderstanding, endowments don't cost millions to be effective. And we're not the only folks that do endowments. Many charities do, and the thresholds vary from charity to charity. But I can list many people who've given gifts over time, myself included, to build a fund up to that $10,000 to be fully operational. How you choose to move forward with your generosity is up to you. You can make your gifts now, you can make them in your will, in life insurance, like all aspects of your estate planning. It's great to look inwards to what's important to you and then plan outwards. That is what Wills Week has been about. It's about willpower. You have a great deal of control over the choices that you make. And I'd like to just leave you with one last story before I turn it back to Noel. And this is a story you may also be very familiar with because it's a famous one. And I'm going to hope that Noel hasn't put this famous man's name up in lights yet.
I have not, no.
Great.
This will be a surprise.
It will be a surprise. Once upon a time, there was a man who accidentally read his own obituary. Can you imagine? And that was because he was a famous man. And when his brother died, there was a mistake made and the wrong obituary was printed. Suffice it to say that this famous man was not happy with what he read. He had been a very successful businessman. He had made his millions at the time in armaments. And he chose to rewrite history by the choices that he made. And we don't remember him for his business acumen. We remember him because of the Nobel Peace Prizes that he created in his will. That is what he remembers him for. We don't have to do something that big and grand, but your kindness will be remembered. Your interests will be supported if you choose to do so. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Noel.
You're turning it back over to me to basically bring it to a close. Thank you very much, Kathy. Basically, this session is not about, this isn't a fundraising call for the Edmonton Community Foundation. This is a great way for us to close Wills Week, where we've spent the past 4 days, talking about how you are designing your legacy your way by creating an estate plan with your professional advisor, so your lawyer, to make sure that your legacy is done the way you want it, that your beneficiaries are taken care of. Like Kathy said earlier, we all want to make sure we take care of our families. But this is just one other aspect of your estate plan. And so we're not, this is not a fundraising call, but it is a call for you to consider charity in your estate plans. And whether it's the Community Foundation or another charity of choice, the end of the day, what does it mean to you to be a philanthropist? And so we encourage you to reach out to us. so that you've got some information here on this last slide. We are a resource for estate lawyers and financial planners. We are a resource for the charitable sector. We partner with hundreds of different charities like the food bank and all the other ones we've used as examples today. And we are a resource for you, the people of Edmonton who have questions about charity. So have a look at our pages, our website for information and resource pages on how to structure a gift, things to think about when leaving a gift to your favorite charity of choice. I talked a little bit about earlier about having a conversation to make sure that the information is correct. So think about all of that. And if you do have specific questions or particular questions, or you'd simply like someone else to do your research, that is a big part of what we do too. Kathy, Matt, Laura, and I spend a lot of time trying to find the right answers for our donors who have questions about organizations, causes, and projects. So don't be afraid to reach out to one of us. Don't be afraid to have a look at the page, the website there for more information.
Yeah.
Well, I think that brings us to the end, Kathy, unless you have any parting words.
No, just thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. We were so thrilled to see so many people sign up for this session. It's, of course, topics that we love. It's how we spend our days. And we just ask you to ask us questions as they come up. You don't have to have created an endowment fund to ask us questions. We're here to be your resource.
Absolutely.